So at this time, Chris Woodruff, if you could come up and introduce our past president, Brenda Donis, and I'm going to try and make this all work. And we will have a microphone that we can pass out for questions after she's done. So after the introduction, please give Brenda a great big Greeley Centennial welcome.
Thank you. Well, I had the honor of working with Brenda for 20 years in the Weld County Assessor's Office. She came back to the Assessor's Office in 1999, and I came to the Assessor's Office from Douglas County in 1999. And that's when our association began, and we worked together for the next 20 years. You've already heard a lot about her Rotary pedigree. What you didn't say was that she's a third-generation Rotarian, and so you need to remember that. But she is going to be speaking to us today as our Weld County Assessor. Brenda has been one of those people that has been, breaking ceilings all over the place. She was the first woman elected to be the Weld County Assessor back in 2018. We've never had a woman assessor before. Last year, the Assessors Association named her Assessor of the Year for the whole state of Colorado. Among the 64 counties, she was the #1 assessor. And this year, she is the president of the Assessors Association in the state of Canada. She is a certified general appraiser, which is the highest level of appraisal licensing. So she is certified to appraise all kinds of property. I can tell you personally, she is truly one of the smartest people I have ever had the pleasure to work with. She is smart, but on top of that, she knows how to get stuff done, and she's compassionate. She cares about people. She never lets it not be part of how she makes her decisions, but she's a stickler for doing it right. And she will work herself harder than anybody that works for her to make sure that it is right. So we are incredibly fortunate that she was reelected as assessor last year for her second term, and that she is fulfilling that incredibly important role. And she'll tell you all about it when she's up here. So please help me welcome Brenda Donis.
All right, I have more pens in case anybody needs them. All right, how embarrassing is this? I think I sound good on paper. Have you ever heard people say that? Like, hey man, I am worth a lot. It's just because if I sold my house that maybe is valued at $700,000, I would be wealthy. But really you're just wealthy on paper. And so that's sort of what I think when I hear from Chris and from Jonathan. I'm like, oh my God, I just sound good on paper because I'm just really just sort of your normal person that just likes to work hard. I just want to get my job done. I just want to work hard. And I appreciate all those wonderful things and I appreciate the recognition, but it's just because I like to work hard. And that's the good part about this. So let's move on. I appreciate you all being here today. Sometimes when you hear that the assessor is going to be your speaker, you don't have anybody show up. I think my smallest meeting so far has been 3 people and 2 of them were the organizers. And so it's really embarrassing where it's like, why is it that I can't seem to draw a crowd? But this topic, it doesn't sound very interesting, right? You think, I don't want to know anything about assessment, property tax, ick. Who wants to pay property tax? There's all sorts of tax that we have to pay. There's severance tax, there's income tax, there's sales tax, there's property tax. I think the best kind of tax is tick tax. If we had to, we should all just have tick tax every time we talk about property tax, because that would make you feel a lot better. And a lot of assessors say we don't ever talk about property tax, we just talk about property value. Because assessors really just have the responsibility of valuing your property. We don't actually carry it all the way through. We don't collect your tax. We don't distribute your tax. But I think as an assessor, if you don't take the time to understand the big picture, if you can't talk with your people about what's important to them, which is really that bottom dollar, then I just don't think you're doing a full service to the business. So we're going to talk not just about value, but we're going to talk about the whole picture, a little bit about property tax and that whole thing. And you know what? I don't like to stand up here and talk without feedback. So I know there's a microphone and I know we're only supposed to ask questions at the end, but I promise you, if you ask me questions as we go, I'll repeat it so that our Zoomers can hear it. And then we'll be able to have a nice dialogue, because I love a program where you actually get what you want. When last week, some people said, oh, you're our program, will you just take our protests right here? I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what you want. You just want to understand why it is your property value is the way it is and why your taxes are so high. So if we just want to talk about that, I'm absolutely fine with that. Otherwise, it's sort of data heavy, because that's the way it goes. And I've been in the assessor's office so long that I could talk forever on it. And so trying to narrow that down is really tricky for me. So here we go. Let's see if we can make this move forward. Oh, there we go. All right, so in the assessor's office, in our 4,000 square mile county, we value everything. So every assessor across the state right now, in an odd number of years, is revaluing all property. And so that's what we're working on, is revaluing every single property in Weld County and really across Colorado. So every assessor in Colorado is doing this. And we value everything you can see and pretty much everything you can't. So where we are right now, we're valuing the land underneath this building. We value the building. We value the equipment in this building, including the tables and the chairs and the desks and the computers and the manufacturing equipment that might be being used somewhere. We value oil and gas, sand and gravel. We value solar panels, unless they're attached to your house. We value wind turbines. We're valuing it all sorts of things. One thing we don't value is business value. So if you own a pizza shop, and you're downtown and you're making a whole bunch of income selling pizza, we don't care what your income is. We don't care how good you are at making pizza, how appealing your pizza is. We don't value that business value. We just value the equipment that you use, the land that your building sits on, and the building that you're occupying. So really the only thing that isn't our responsibility is that business value. We do so much more in the assessor's office than just value property. We are always making sure that we have the ownership of your property rights. So every single time a property sells, we're making sure we know who it's sold to. We're identifying whether that ownership is complete or not. So for example, if the right-of-way sells, does that right-of-way include the land? Was it a surface use? Was it a full use of the entire property? We evaluate all of those things. We talk lots about funding and budgeting. I talk to fire districts and school districts and towns, the county. We're constantly talking about the impact of property tax and what the future of property tax is. And then we talk a lot these days to the legislators. They are constantly asking about the impact of property tax and what it's going to do, because the primary purpose of property tax is to fund schools. That's the main reason property tax was put into place, was to fund schools. And so everybody wants to know, how are we going to continue to fund schools at the level that we think is important? It's been a really busy couple of years. I became assessor in 2019. And so I've done more with the legislature than I think we've done prior to that. We've been in front of the Supreme Court twice for Weld County. That's really unusual. We've just had all sorts of things going on. So it's been a really lively couple of years. And the truth is, it's just addictive. I absolutely love it. You know, it's one of those things where you see this data on, and you're going to see, if you're not a numbers person, you're going to be like, boring. But this is so interesting because it's all about property and real estate and the economy and all the things that happen that make property worth something. And so I just find it fascinating. I absolutely love what I do. I'm absolutely obsessed with it. And it's probably one of the reasons I'm pretty good at it, is because I just love it. I'm fascinated by the way it all works. So like I said, I could talk forever. Just this graph right here talks about the changes in our assessed value. And I know there's a lot of data on here and we can narrow it down. But when I became assessor in 2019, we hit $15 billion in assessed value. 15 billion. I said, this is so stupid of me. I said, when we hit 15 billion, I was like, I think this is the highest we're ever going to be. I don't think we're going to go higher than 15 billion. I can't imagine. I can't imagine us going higher than 15 billion. That was back when oil was just about $70 a barrel, maybe just a little bit less than $70 a barrel. And then what happened? Well, then we had a couple of rough years. We had a COVID year in there. We had a crash in oil and gas. But what happened last year when we hit 2022? We had a huge spike. It wasn't a spike in residential value. It wasn't a spike in commercial value, because in 2022, which is an even numbered year, we don't revalue all property. We only revalue oil and gas and personal property. And so what happened with oil and gas? The price of oil and gas skyrocketed. And who would have been able to predict that? I certainly don't think I would have, because I could not have known that we were going to have a war in Ukraine that was going to cause a global change to the price of oil and gas. I couldn't have known that OPEC was even though President Biden said, please keep producing oil and gas, OPEC was going to say, nope, never mind. We're going to cut back on the production of oil and gas. We're going to cut back on the supply. And what did it do? It drove up the price. And so those things are things that make this job so difficult, because I'm constantly being asked to predict what value is 5 years out. Please tell us what the value is going to be for the next 5 years. I don't know if now that we have nuclear armed vessels in the Baltic Sea, is that going to cause an influence on oil and gas? Quite possibly, but I don't know that. Are there other things that are going to happen in the world that are going to influence oil and gas? I have no idea. And what I can do is do a little better job of predicting residential or commercial. Because in general, we can say, do we think the economy is going to be improving? Yes, unless there's a war. Yes, unless this. Yes, unless that. So it's a little bit easier to predict residential, but it's almost impossible to predict oil and gas. And on this slide, you can see that the most volatile bar on here is the top one, and that's oil and gas. That's what oil and gas value has done over the last several years. It's gone up, it's gone down, it's gone up, it's gone down, and now it's up again. So over time, what's really volatile, particularly in Weld County, is that oil and gas valuation. All the other ones on the bottom are pretty consistent. If we zoom in just to the lower lines, now we've cut oil and gas out of the picture. And you can see that the top line is residential, and it's just increasing steadily. And you know that because the price of your home continues to appreciate over time. There's been a few dips in the past where we've had a recession, some things have happened that have caused residential values to slowly to be declining for just a little bit of time, but generally residential value, which is that top line, just continues to increase. And the next three lines are that combination of commercial and industrial, and actually we have state assessed in there. And those also continue to just generally increase over time. What's interesting in Weld County, what makes us a little bit different, besides just the fact that we have so much oil and gas, is that we have a lot of industrial activity here. And so when you combine our commercial and industrial, we're at about 14%. And for us, industrial continues to increase more than anything else. So that line is going up and up and up, and we continue to get a lot of new manufacturing that comes in and increases the amount of value that we have in the industrial classification. It's just much more common. We have a lot more space. Industrial can come in, put in big facilities. We have workforce here, and so they're able to do a lot of business here in Weld County. They might not see that. And this would not look the same if we were in Denver County. Denver County, they focus primarily on commercial and residential. And when you think about it, why is that? They have the strip of downtown Denver with all of those high rises. So they carry a lot of value in their commercial property, small value in their industrial property, and then a lot of value in their residential as well. So it varies all across the state. We're all very different. And one of the things that we keep having to talk about, especially with our legislators, is that we are very different across the state. So if you're trying to make a one-size-fits-all decision for across the state, it's tricky. How do you make sure that our eastern plains aren't being negatively impacted when you're trying to make a change for what is happening in an urban corridor or in our mountain area? And that's one of the things that's so complicated right now on property tax. Chris,
Yes,
thank you.
you bet. I was going to ask you, what do you see as the impact of new construction in that residential line?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So every 2 years, we revalue all property, and every 2 years, we're revaluing residential. What that means is that we're resetting it based on the market year, based on the market prices. But in the even numbered years, the growth that you're seeing on this is solely from new construction. And so if we go back to 2015, for example, we can say that we were at $1.45 billion of value in residential value. And then the next year we see the line went up, but it wasn't because of any appreciation in the market. It was solely because of new construction. The next year it went up, and it was a combination of appreciation in the market and new construction. And then again, when we get to the ticks that are in the in-between, the only change is from new construction. And so you can see that we continue to go up because of new construction. And we're averaging right now we were averaging about 5,000 new homes per year being built in Weld County. And that is a significant growth rate. We have dropped recently, we're at about 4,000 right now, and we're seeing a slowdown continue. So when we're looking into what's happening right now, we're seeing that, or we're anticipating that we're going to drop down into the 3,600, 3,700 units per year. That's still a really healthy growth rate. We have about 100,000 residences, and so it's still a really healthy growth rate. But it is slowing a little bit, and some of that's just cost of construction, interest rate. So if they're not able to sell those homes, they're not going to build them. We're seeing a lot of fancy incentives, some things where some of the large builders are holding down some of the interest rates. They're letting you buy down. And so that's helping, but it's still not enough.
Does that include apartments?
No, the question was, does that include apartments? And we're seeing really high growth in apartments. As a matter of fact, if you were here last week, you heard Becky Safford talk about how apartment growth and multifamily growth is the new trend. And that's absolutely true. Not only is it the new trend, we're seeing so many new apartments, we're seeing a lot of new multifamily, but we're seeing such high prices. If you're familiar with the 10 West apartment complex, which is on 10th Street, if I remember right, it's just across from King Soopers, brand new. It's sold for $80 million. $80 million. If you came up to figure out what that is per unit, it's about $240,000 per unit. So when we look at that dollar per square foot, it's exactly in line with what we're seeing single family residential properties sell for. And so apartments are a really hot commodity, and we're seeing a lot of new construction in that apartment type as well. I think it was Sterling Heights, also another apartment complex that just sold for just over 40 million. So apartments are a really popular hot commodity. So who pays? All the tax. So we were just talking about oil and gas being such a big player in Weld County. If you just break it down, how much is oil and gas responsible for right now? 62%. That's in Weld County, that's what they pay. 62% of all of the property tax is paid by oil and gas. And we are dealing with a lot of challenge with oil and gas. We've had a lot of consolidation. So we used to have about 100 companies, oil and gas companies. We're down to about 75 right now. You would think that all the little ones, but the truth is that it was the big ones. The big ones consolidated, they ate up a lot of the middle ones. So now we have these huge big ones at the top and then a bunch of little ones at the bottom. And when I say little, I mean that they're under 100 wells. And our big ones are somewhere in between 2,000 wells and 6,000 wells. And those big ones are hard to deal with. So when you're an assessor, you're a lowly elected official dealing with property tax and you're arguing with them about what their value is. And one of the things you boil down to, and this is what I've dealt with all day yesterday, is them saying, I need a refund of $500,000 in tax. And me saying, you underpaid your tax by $2 million. And they're saying, can you just make it go away? And I'm thinking, I don't think it quite works that way. I don't think I can quite just be like, sure, we'll just ignore that this ever happened. And so it's really complicated though, because they're constantly threatening you with lawyers. No, we'll just bring our lawyers in. We'll just take you to court. We'll just fight you there. And it's like, that's not quite fair because I don't have big lawyers. I don't have deep pockets. And yet that's what we keep ending up with is these threats from these big companies. So for all that I'm a really big supporter of oil and gas, and I see that they pay 60% of the tax, which means you're not paying that portion. I also always remember that there's two sides to every story, right? They're on one side fighting a good fight, and I'm on another side fighting a good fight. And we're gonna eventually, most likely, find something in the middle. But I also don't want to always think, oh, they're wonderful, they're amazing. But I also don't want to think, oh, they're terrible, they're awful. So you have to stay really, really neutral in this business, constantly staying right in the middle. Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, you hear rumors, of course, from our officials with all the climate change and this and that,
Yeah.
Fossil fuels might be out of business in 6 years. Really? I don't think so, but who's going to replace the oil and gas business?
I agree. The question is, who's gonna replace that oil and gas value? I mean, eventually, this will start to decline. No matter what the legislature, no matter what anyone does, eventually this will start to decline. And one of the reasons why is because it's a declining asset, right? We're gonna run out. And more than that, we're gonna run out of space. So if I were to pop up our website right now, and I could do this at the end, I could show you where all the oil and gas wells are in Weld County. And I can also show you where all of the horizontal drilling is in Weld County. And there's gonna be a point where we no longer have any geography left to drill new wells. And new wells are what drive the majority of our value. Within the first 1 to 2 years, new wells lose about 50% of their value. And that's because the production drops just that quickly. So in the first couple of years, production drops, third and fourth year, production drops, and then I call it, we sort of bump along at the bottom after that, somewhere in between 7% and 23% of what the original production was. And that's not saying that it's not a lot of production still. It's just when they first tap into those new wells, those pressures are so high, there's so much there, it just comes out of the ground and it's high production amounts. So eventually this piece of the pie is going to shrink no matter what happens. But there is truth to the fact that our legislators keep saying, we need to shut down oil and gas, we need to shut down oil and gas. And same thing, I've had multiple conversations with legislators because oil and gas, all of property tax funds all of those local services. It's a local property tax. So it's funding your fire districts, your school districts, your towns, your county, your city. All of those different things are getting funded. You what?
Your golf tournament.
I know those donations to your golf tournament. Absolutely. Big industry helps with nonprofits, all sorts of different things. And so that's what it's all about, is funding all of those items. Well, eventually this is going to shrink, but what legislators want to know is when is it going to shrink? And if we make these changes, what's it going to do to school funding? Because if the local share of school funding declines, the state share of funding has to increase. And that's a big concern for the state. So even though they're constantly talking about needing to shrink oil and gas and not wanting as much, they also know there is a financial impact to doing that. And that means the state will also have to come up with more money in order to fund our schools. And so it is this constant push and pull of how do we make sure that people aren't paying too much tax, and how are we supporting or not supporting fossil fuels, and how are we getting the revenue we need for all of our local services? You guys all good? Yep.
Just quickly, do you also assess water rights?
That's a tough question. So we assess water rights, but really only to the land it serves. And so it's primarily related to, in Colorado, land or water has to be put to a beneficial use. And so you don't have a right to sit on your water shares and not have it being used. And so when you use that water, you're using it for some purpose. If it's being used for agricultural land and it's irrigated land, then we're assessing it because we're valuing irrigated land. So we assess it from that perspective. If you're a water district and you are like Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District, you have a lot of water, we are not assessing that a property tax. So they are managing that, they're exempt from taxation. They're managing that themselves. So I feel like I didn't answer your question because I saw you wrinkle your nose. Okay, yeah. So I'm talking about oil and gas. I'm talking about how Weld County has 62% of their value in oil and gas. And if you look at the right bar on this is Weld County. You can see this green portion is oil and gas. But location matters, just like for everything. In real estate, location always matters, right? So not every taxing authority, we have about 450 taxing authorities in Weld County, 450 local governments that get taxed. Not every taxing authority in Weld County has a lot of oil and gas value. If we scooch over to, if we work backwards, we can look here. This is Eaton Parks and Rec. It's one of our newest taxing authorities. They also have 64% of their value in oil and gas. But that's Eaton Parks and Rec. Look at what Eaton gets, 2%. So why do we have such a big difference between Eaton and Eaton Parks and Rec? What makes the difference in terms of why one would get a lot of value from oil and gas and why the other wouldn't? It's because Eaton Parks and Rec is mostly country property, rural property, and Eaton is town properties. Well, where are oil and gas wells located? They're mostly located in the country. And so we value oil and gas at the wellhead, right where the oil comes out of the ground. And so Eaton, even if they have a lot of horizontal lines underneath them, they don't get any of that value. The only value they get from oil and gas is right where that wellhead is located. And so the same thing happens. School District 6, they get 22% of their overall value from oil and gas, whereas Greeley is only getting 16% of their value from oil and gas. And so location really makes a big difference. And so even though in Weld County, we talk a lot about oil and gas, Greeley might not really worry about it too much because it doesn't have a huge impact on their value. Instead, they're looking at the orange portion of this bar, which is the 41% that's coming from residential. I'm nodding like y'all good. Thank you. I do like the feedback. All right, so so we said who pays the property tax? A lot of it's oil and gas. Who gets the property tax? It's really the schools. Schools get 42% of the property tax. And then who's next? The county. The county gets almost 20% of property tax. And this is the way it was really structured. Originally, there were only 3 taxing authorities in Weld County: school district, county, and city. That was it, 3. That's what it was there for, was to fund schools, to fund the county, to make sure that they could bring in infrastructure that you can't get from a private industry. Water, utilities, all of those things, schools, public schools. And so you might agree or disagree on whether you think public school is doing a good job, but it's still free public school for everyone, and it's your property taxes helping pay for that. We've added a lot of different types of districts. Of course, fire districts. I really appreciate fire districts. I certainly don't want my house to be burning down and me have to go find a credit card in order to pay the fire company. Please put out my fire. Here's my credit card so that you will go ahead and put out the fire in my house. I'm prepaying for that. I appreciate that. I appreciate the services that we get from having roads, from having the sheriff's office, from having the police department, from having water and sewer. Other things that we add in here are metro districts, and that is the one that keeps growing, and that one has a huge impact. So over time, what's happened is cities are no longer funding the infrastructure for subdivisions. And if cities aren't going to fund the infrastructure for subdivisions, somebody needs to fund the infrastructure for those subdivisions. And that's really where metro districts came from. So they're collecting money from future property owners in order to develop that subdivision, in order to put in water and sewer and curb and gutter and all of those things that are needed for a subdivision. And they usually also offer some enhancements and things like a clubhouse, walking paths, maybe a pool, some of those things. But as a property owner, if you live in an area where there's a metro district, you're going to have a whole lot more property tax. So typical property tax, typical mill levy for all property in Greeley, for example, is 90 mills right now. If you live in a metro district, you might as well go ahead and add 50 mills onto that. So 50 mills is a typical addition that you're going to be paying for a metro district. That is a lot. Now we're starting to get boring, right? You guys getting bored yet? Let's wake back up.
Define mill.
Yes, well, I define mill. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I can define mill, and from the perspective of every taxing authority gets to identify how much money they need in order to have services, to provide the services that you need. And what they do is they look and they say, I need a certain percentage of my overall assessed value in order to be able to have enough money to provide the services I need. And then when you and that's called a mill levy. It's 1/1000th of a dollar, basically. And so we're looking at how much revenue a taxing authority needs. And when we add them all together, let's do this one. When we add them all together, here's the average mill levies that every town has. So the biggest one right now, Erie. If you're in Erie, you have 150 mills on your property. And so in order to figure out what that means, you take your actual value times your assessed value and you multiply it by your mill levy. So in Greeley, we're currently at 90 mills. And if you want to go someplace super cheap where you're not going to pay a lot of property tax, you could go to Grover. Because Grover only has 46 mills. So you really do pay. You really do have to think, where do I want to live and what do I pay? So mill levies are all over the board. I live south of Johnstown. So I don't, here's mine, 117. I don't actually pay the full 117 because I don't live in Johnstown. So I would deduct out the amount of levy that's for Johnstown, which would be in your little booklet. I don't know, let's say it's 10 mills. And that would put me at 110. But what's happened in Johnstown is that Johnstown voters approved a new school, right? So they approved a school bond and they approved a mill levy override for our school. And so in 1 year, we went from 87 mills to 117 mills, up 30 more mills because of a school. And so when you have those elections, it makes a difference because as soon as you guys voted in and said, yes, we absolutely need a new school, which I think Johnstown did. I don't know if you're aware, but Johnstown's one of the hottest growing communities right now. And I know that because of the number of metro districts that are coming in. Metro districts perceive growth right now. And we see tons of metro districts that are being developed right now. And so we know that Johnstown is going to be the hot spot. And if you haven't been to Johnstown I-25 and Highway 60, where they're building a lot of new commercial growth right now, Buc-ee's, they're building Murdoch's, a whole bunch of new stuff right there. Yeah, so it's going to be the next hot spot for growth. Windsor has been the hot spot for growth, and it's shifting. It's coming down to Johnstown. We still have some growth in Frederick Firestone area. We still have some growth in Erie, but we're really starting to see it be a little bit more centralized at Johnstown. I think Frederick and Firestone will pick up a little bit more pretty soon. Anyway, back to this. So mill levy really makes a difference in terms of where you're located and how much property tax you're going to pay. Let me go back really quick. Because this is what makes it complicated. Property tax is actually very transparent. It's your actual value times your assessment rate times your mill levy. That's it. Property tax. That's all there is to it. It's one of the most transparent kinds of tax you can pay. Sales tax. Think about income tax. Do you consider that transparent? There's nothing about income tax that's transparent. So it's very transparent. You can find your actual value. You can find your assessment rate. You can find your mill levy anytime you want it. It's available on our website. But what makes it complicated is there's 3 pieces to that formula: actual value, assessed value, mill levy, and they all change independently by different groups. Actual value is what the assessor's office does. We set your actual value. Your assessment rate used to be tied to the Gallagher Amendment. Voters said, we don't want the Gallagher Amendment anymore. They said that in 2020. And so now that's totally tied to the legislature. And the legislature is always thinking that they should change it. They change the assessment rates constantly. We never know what they're going to be. They go up, they go down, they're moving all over the place right now. We cannot figure out what's going to happen with assessment rates. And then mill levies change as taxing authorities decide they need more or less, and voters decide they need more or less. And you can see, I was talking about a difference in the bottom here. I was talking about a difference because of your mill levy. If you have 95 mills, you would pay $2,641 in tax. And if you have 135 mills, you're going to pay $3,700 in tax. So $1,000 more just for that difference of 40 mills. All right, big difference. And we're going too fast. I'm going to skip assessment rates, except that you know that there's a lot of variation in assessment rates, and I don't know that we'll ever settle them down until the legislature comes up with some new rules for property tax as a whole. But what you need to know, what I really wanted to talk with you about is that June 30th, 2022 is the date of valuation. So I need you to roll your head back, like roll back time right now. Remember what your property was worth? Do you remember what property values were doing? Do you remember how active the market was on June 30th? Really active. Lots was happening on June 30th of 2022. That is this one right here. Do you see this? So the blue bar is the number of sales. See how many sales are dropping off over time? We are not having much sales activity, and that's because of interest rates. What's the orange? Orange is sale price, gradually increasing, gradually increasing. And look at how high it was on June 30th, the peak of the market. And that's the date that assessors are required to value your property. We just don't pick it out of the world, you know, it isn't always like this. But it's June 30th of every even year. The problem is that June 30th of this 2022 was the absolute peak of the market. And if you were to tell me what your property value is worth right now, you would probably be coming back down on this line and seeing that it's not worth as much as it was on June 30th of 2022. And that's not true everywhere. This shows you the difference between Eaton, Evans, Greeley, Johnstown, and Windsor. And the gold line is June 30th of 2022. And some of these are sort of on top of each other. So let's look at Greeley. Greeley was on June 30th of 2022 is 447,000. That was the middle of the road in terms of sales, right in the middle. If we put them all in order and we find the middle one, 447,000. That's up from 380,000 the year before and 332,000 the year before that. 447,000. But if we look at it what it is today, it's 431,000. So it's dropped a little bit in Greeley. Look at Windsor, gold bar, that's June 30th, 2022, 568,000. Did it drop like Greeley? No, it went up 596,000. And Eaton's exactly flat, 445 on June 30th, 445 today. And so again, location really matters. It makes a big difference on where you are and what you can expect. So again, if we zoom in on a certain subdivision, this is Westmore and Weber West sales. What do you see when you look at all these dots? If you say like 2 people walking on the beach and holding hands, that would be what I'm going to be doing tomorrow. I hope, although I don't know if you've heard, they've had quite a bit of rain, so we'll see. But what you should be seeing when you look at this is a trend. You see a gradual increase in dots. This is saying every single sale that's happening over time, they're gradually increasing. If I actually draw a line in there so that you don't have to see the pattern yourself, that's what it looks like. We can see that when we end school, we get a little bit of a decline in value because that's what happens. And then as we move forward, we get an increase in value. And again, if we take that one step further and we say, what's the current value doing versus June 30th, we see this drastic drop off. So in a lot of our subdivisions in Greeley, we're seeing this huge decline. So when you get your notice of value from us, you're reflecting your value on June 30th, which I'm so sorry, it is the peak of the market. That was absolutely outside of our control. It is one of the things the legislature is very disturbed about. They want to figure out how to reduce residential property value. They want to come up with a way to fulfill what I call the Polis promise. And the Polis promise, the governor Polis made the promise that he would keep more money in your pockets and it would be the result of property tax. But every taxing authority is like, how in the world are you going to keep more money in people's pockets and not give us the money we need to provide our services? So we've got a big argument going on right now about what's the best way to try to keep more money in your pockets and also fund all of our local services. So we know what residential is doing, what's commercial doing is also going up. This is one of the warehouses that's currently for lease. We look at cost, market, and income for commercial property. Costs are going up, sales are going up, income, the rent that they receive is going up. I used to tell you that warehouses would rent for about $8 a square foot. Now it's $10 a square foot. Offices, even offices are going up, which is sort of surprising because we have a lot of people working from home. They're not going up at the same rate, but they are still going up. Pretty difficult to value though, because look at this. They have 2 offices that are for lease. One is for $9.20 and one is for $16 a square foot. They're almost identical. And so, at least from the assessor's perspective, because we don't always know everything that goes on inside a building. For some reason, you guys don't us there. So you don't always know what's happening on the inside of your property. But it's pretty difficult to value a place like this when we don't know why one is leasing for $9.20 and one is leasing for $16. But in all honesty, I would be saying that we were expecting offices to be somewhere in that $13 a square foot range for property like this. So which is residential and commercial, we're seeing 35% increase from what we had last year. And so if you're trying to figure out what's going to happen to you and what your escrow is going to look like, you should be expecting, and your property tax in general, 35% increase for next year. And it's significant. So you'll get a notice of value from us. You're going to get it on May 1. You're going to want to look at this current value. You're going to want to look at the difference in your value. We put an estimate of tax on there for you, and we tell you how much it increased. So we give you all of the information you need in order to get that snapshot look at what's happening. And I'm sure you're going to get it and be like, oh, it's lovely. It's wonderful. It's perfect. Because we do a good job. But we are from the government, and I know that you might not think that we're here to help you. And so you can go verify it yourself. As a matter of fact, we have some great tools on our website to help you figure out at any time of the year, it doesn't just have to be when you get your notice of value, what your value is. We have this sales search functionality on our website, and I'm gonna pop into this in just a second on the live website, just so that you can see it. But it's super cool. You get to find your own property. You get to see all the sales of property around you. You can click on just the sales you want to see, and you can create a PDF to show how they vary so that you can identify if the value we have on your property actually makes sense. And if you think it doesn't, what can you do? You can protest. You can come tell us that we didn't do a good job. And you don't have to come tell us. You can do it online. You can do it by phone, mail, fax, email. We make it super simple for you to tell us that we didn't do a good job. And that's okay. It's part of your right, and it's going to affect your pocketbook. So it's okay if people think they need to protest. Typically, we would get about 5,000 to 6,000 protests a year. We are expecting more this year, and it's simply because we know that the current values are down, especially in Greeley. And so people will expect us. There's this belief that assessors are always undervaluing your property. And it's not true. We're supposed to be at the actual sale price of your property on June 30th. In the Weld County Assessor's Office, we have a little buffer in the law. We actually have a 5% buffer. We always target 3% under what the sale price, what we anticipate the sale price would be, in order to try to keep that 3% in your pocket. But it doesn't mean 3% is not going to be enough to offset that loss in value that we've seen in some of our areas. So we're expecting a few more protests. So let's see. Interesting things that have happened. Are you guys familiar with the Smucker's plant? The uncrustable plant? It's pretty cool. This was one of the little articles in the, I think it was in BizWest. 430,000 square foot facility produces uncrustables, which are those frozen peanut butter and jelly sandwiches that don't have crust on them. They're claiming it's a $300 billion facility, and then they added on an additional 240,000 square foot expansion. And so I just thought it would be interesting for you to know that this property is one of our highest valued properties in Weld County. And if we just look at the land and the building, you would almost expect it to be 300 million because they're advertising it at 300 million. But the truth is we only have it valued at 100 million. And it's just 100 million. And so 100 million. And that's because the difference is all of the equipment they have inside. And so you can never forget about how much equipment is inside these manufacturing facilities. And that makes up that full $200 million in value. So guys, so knowing that this is one of the biggest properties in Weld County, what do you think one of the biggest properties in Greeley is? Food manufacturing. Leprino. Absolutely. Leprino, one of our, the big cheese manufacturer, right? Valued at almost $70 million just for the land and building. So that is a lot of money. That's a lot of value. And I don't know if you're familiar with Agilent. This is down south. This is down close to Frederick and Firestone. They said 725 million for their value. We actually only have 33 million on it right now. Again, because it is such complicated equipment on the inside, because they are doing advanced chemistry, let's just say that, chemistry, there's a huge value in just the personal property. And I have some of these biggest sales in residential, and I misplaced them. So, here. Do you know that in 2022, you know the highest value sale price of residential property in Greeley? Just Greeley? 1.6 million. Can you believe it? We have a property in Greeley City that was 1.6 million in Pine Ridge. I know much about it. I figured I'd get back at him after that introduction. So it's in Pine Ridge Estates, and it's 8,000. Well, it's 4,000 square foot ranch on the above level, 4,000 square foot ranch in the basement. So 8,000 total, sold for 1.6 million. We also have one that sold for 1.2 million in Westridge and 1 million over in West Point. The biggest sales in Weld County right now sit in Erie. There's Erie Air Park. Those are huge sales where we vary between 3 and 5 million. and in Windsor, where we have Water Valley, same thing, about $3 million. So. I can go on and on and on and on, but I won't. Thank you. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Oh, I should tell you about some of the cool, this is the cool stuff that's coming up. Unique property valuation. We value future legends. You've been out there? Sports Park in Windsor, where they have that big air structure and all sorts of interesting hotels, and they're starting to do all the soccer fields and all of that. That one's gonna be a real challenge to value. And then just across the street, we have Gotham Greens, which is the new trend for indoor vertical farming. And indoor vertical farming is really being promoted by the legislature. So I imagine we'll get a lot more of these indoor lettuce growing operations. And that's it. Any questions? I talked to you. No. Yeah. I have more pens if you want them. Thank you all so much. If you have any questions when you do your notice of value, just give me a call.
Very good.
Thank
Let me
you.
see if there's any- Stop sharing that, bring up our Zoomers. Any questions on Zoom? It looks like we only have Marlon and Colette, no questions. All right, Kenny, we'll see the lips. Picture, all right.